Welcome to the latest roundup of news and polls from Ipsos. March was certainly a turbulent month. Following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we saw that foreign affairs and defence jumped right to the top of our issues index. This is the highest level of concern that we've seen on this issue from the public since the terror attack on the Bataclan Theatre in Paris back in December 2015. The British people are very concerned about the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, not just on the Ukrainian civilians, but also on the economy, our own national safety and security, and 6 in 10 are worried about the impact on themselves in some way. This level of concern is feeding into high levels of public support for intervention, whether that be diplomatic, economic or humanitarian. And whilst in the eyes of the British public, the Ukrainian President Zelensky is perceived to be handling this invasion well, opinion is slightly more mixed when it comes to how our own Prime Minister is perceived to be performing in this regard. Nearly as many people disapprove of the way Boris Johnson is handling the Russian invasion as approve. And although he does have a higher proportion of people approving his way of handling it than the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, and worth noting that his net score of +3 is better than the figures that Tony Blair recorded for his handling of the Iraq War. Overall, around half of Britons are satisfied with the way the UK government is handling the Russian invasion. And the British public, they do trust Conservatives more than Labour on defence by a 2-1 margin. But when you widen the topic out and you look at how the public, who they trust on foreign affairs more broadly, yes, it is still Conservatives, but with a smaller margin. And they also remain quite critical of how the government is helping refugees, with 56% believing that they're not doing enough. But beyond the war in Ukraine, there are some other fairly dominant issues at the forefronts of the mind of the public. Inflation, cost of living and inflation. Our economic optimism has sharply dropped in the last year, and we now find that over 3 in 4 people think this economy is going to worsen in the next 12 months. It's comparable with some of the worst scores we've ever recorded in over 40 years, and it's slightly worse than even we saw during the 2008 financial crash. The public are more likely to trust the Labour Party to manage Britain's taxes and public spending and reduce cost of living than they are the Conservatives, whilst 2/3 of Britons do not trust the Conservatives to reduce cost of living. This is all impacting into the perceptions of Rishi Sunak, and we're seeing a real steady decline now in the popularity of the Chancellor as public concern about the economy and inflation has really started to bite. This is the same Chancellor, remember, who once had one of the highest satisfaction ratings we have ever seen back in the early stages of the pandemic, next only to Healey back in the 1970s. But now the proportion who think he's doing a bad job has increased from 25% in early March to 33% today, and the spring statement has done little to improve his standing amongst the public. Only 1 in 5 Britons have confidence that he's going to change the economy for the better in future. 8 in 10 Britons now expect to see their cost of utilities, gas, electric to increase. But worth noting, the public don't just lay the blame for the rising cost of living at the door of Mr Sunak, or indeed the government as a whole. There are strong majorities who perceive the key drivers to be the pandemic, the situation in Ukraine and Brexit. With the end of COVID restrictions and with concern about COVID continuing to decline, we've looked at how the UK and people's lives changed over the last 2 years. 31% now say they feel lonelier than before the pandemic. And alongside this, nearly half think that they're seeing their friends and family less and leaving the house less than they did before the pandemic began. A majority believe that a range of NHS services have got worse since before the pandemic, but they also tend to think that this is at least partly because of the pandemic. On other matters, for International Women's Day, we partnered with the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's to deliver a global study looking at gender equality and the distance we have yet to travel. You can watch my conversation with Theresa May and Julia Gillard here. And also, as talk continues about the much mooted Great Resignation, our fantastic colleagues at Carrion & Box, our employee experience business, have found the proportion of employees who intend to leave their employer in the next 2 years is still lower than it was pre-pandemic. You can read their report here. Finally, on the day the House of Lords considered an assisted dying amendment to the Health and Social Care Bill, we found that 7 in 10 Britons supported assisted dying. You can find all these and more on our website. Thank you.